take a slightly unusual way of introducing Robin by reading an article, or an excerpt from an article from last Sunday's paper. It was an article by Jerry Hassan, and I think it's appropriate to read this. If you bear with me, it just takes about a minute. And this is what it says. In many respects, Scotland is already quasi-independent. We need to take the leap and start consistently acting like it, getting serious, strategic, and engaging in difficult discussion. This requires creating non-party, informed resources, such as independence supporting think tanks, aiding the work done by Common Weal and others. This is not a project that the SNP seems interested in, as they prioritise the party as the means to independence, and view independence-minded ideas as a threat, inviting us instead to take independence as a leap of faith and to worry about the detail later. Scotland has to have a debate beyond the SNP about what independence means in the early 21st century and about its constraints and opportunities. For some, all that matters is being a sovereign, independent country. But that constituency isn't a majority, and nor does it deal with the nature of globalization and interdependence. We have to talk about policy, practice, and ideas to create the Scotland of the future. Now, I regard this man here, Robin, as someone who does just that. I regard him as our critical friend. And my goodness, we're at a time when we need critical friends, and we need real debate about where we're going to go and how we're going to get there. So over to you, Rob.
I've got a big one. That sounds like an introduction to the talk I'll be doing from the start of next year once we publish our white paper project. So do keep an eye open for that, because we have been doing a lot of work in Common Weal to try to set out what would we do to develop the case for the next independence referendum. So we spent quite a bit of time today working through that, and early January, leading up to the Scottish Independence Convention conference on the 14th of January, we will publish the first iteration of what we are suggesting should be the white paper on which the next independence campaign is fought. That's for another time. Okay, tonight there's more for me to say than I'll have time to say, so I'm just going to crack on. I will probably stop me once the time is to come to stop, because there's too much on the question of the economy. So I'm just going to go through as much of it as I can, and then once my time's up, you can ask questions on anything that I haven't got to, or any of the things I have. And what I'm mainly going to say, mainly going to talk about, is economic issues as we stand now. So rather than talking about what we could do after independence, I want to look at the analysis of where we are now, what we can do now, and then you can take a fairly basic assumption that we can double all of that if we had all the powers of an independent country. But I think it's useful in testing to say to ourselves, what are the actions that we can take? It makes you think about now better than if you say, okay, at some point in the future we could. So almost everything I'm going to talk about is doable under the powers that we have in Scotland at the moment. But first, the problem. One of the fundamental problems is there's lots of things I'd like to tell you today, but nobody knows. Nobody knows. Scotland is a data desert. It is a phenomenally unexplored country. We have no basic information about an enormous number of things in Scotland. We do not know what our balance of trade is. We do not know what the balance between what we export and what we import is. We're not even clear on what we export. So if you've heard many times that our number one export market is England, it probably never occurred to you that quite a large chunk of that export is English mortgage payers paying their mortgages to English banks, which are subsidiaries of RBS. So the nameplates in Edinburgh, which means all those mortgage payments appear to be cross-border flows. Except for that's not an export, not in any meaningful sense. So you try and find out what the exports are, it's very difficult. You try and identify the Scottish economists. Now there are economists in Scotland, but you try and find economists who are concentrating or focusing on the Scottish economy. There's a few people in the Fraser of Islander Institute, and there are a few people who take an interest in economic development issues in Scotland, but we don't have a lot of economists. Who is, and this is I think a fundamental question, who is Scotland's leading economic commentator? And I'm going to say yes, except commentator as in not a member of a political party arguing from a partisan position. See? Kind of it. Douglas Fraser and Jim McCormick. Douglas Fraser is really a business correspondent. He's not an economist. We don't have a serious commentator. We're a nation without a single serious economic independent commentator with an economics background. That should alarm us. So the first thing that I want to say is we need to gather an awful lot more information about the Scottish economy. I could spend the whole night tonight only talking about the things we don't know about the Scottish economy. And I'm going to say that it is absolutely within the powers of the existing Scottish Government to set up a national statistics agency. This is information gathering, it can be done tomorrow, set up an office, put good statisticians in it. I'm sure that Jim Cuthbert, who was previously the head of statistics at the Scotland office, would help out with that. But this is a major problem. We do not have in this country the infrastructure of a proper nation state when it comes to examining and looking at our economy, and it makes a lot of the rest of it more difficult. Right, then, where I really want to begin is by saying that you cannot fix things if you do not have an analysis of what they are and what's up. So, what is it about the Scottish economy that you would identify as strength or weakness, as areas for development, as problem? We don't discuss this properly. We tend to do everything in sound bites and giveaways. The foundations of the economy are solid, we're growing, blah, 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 blah. Right, that's fine, except what is it then that we're saying about the economy? What is the aim, what is the goal, what is the structure? And I think I'm going to pick three major themes for analysis. Things that I'm going to say are ways that we should look at our economy now. Number one, ownership. Now for the SNP, this should be a very big issue. We have an exceptionally high volume of our economy which is not owned inside our economy. This is really important for a whole host of reasons. If you have your economy owned by overseas corporations, then profits are exported. So as soon as you have large parts of your economy, for example, all your airports owned by Spanish and Chinese firms, all your energy supply, or a large chunk of your energy supply owned by a Spanish corporation, all your high streets dominated by multinational corporations, etc., etc. When you have a high degree of overseas ownership, number one, you lose you lose profits. They're exported and not recycled. Second of all, they have no commitment to the country, to long-term investment or to staying there. They prioritise low pay, fast turnaround, low margin, high volume. Should I say that again? I'm going to say that again. Right, so what they tend to prioritise is businesses which make small profits on large amounts of sales based on low skills and low productivity. So it's the supermarket model, the retailer model. Rather than saying we will make higher profits on more valuable work in a smaller volume, for example manufacturing, we will make smaller profits on a larger volume which doesn't involve skills, so we can keep pay and investment low. So far too much of our economy is dominated by industries which are based on building a shed, filling it with Chinese goods, paying kids low salaries to stock the shelves, and trying to persuade you that you haven't bought enough this week. And that's far too much of our economy is one like that. But it's not just that. It is. I know of somebody who worked as a public affairs, a lobbyist, and had done some work with a Danish energy company. And he said in private to them, he said, it's amazingly easy to take Scotland's assets. It's amazingly easy for an overseas company to come in here and get the license to develop our wind power. And he wasn't saying that as a compliment. So this is another factor. We have to think about where our economy is owned. And that links into the next thing which we need to say about our economy. I'm not going to say productivity, I'm going to say productiveness. So this is I'm trying to use this as a bigger idea. So this is not just the model of how much value are we squeezing out of each hour of labour in the country, blah, blah, blah. This is the question of how much do we produce, and off that production, what value goes into it. So we have nothing like enough manufacture, nothing like enough production in this country. We import far too much. Most of the West does, or a lot of the West does. The UK's, this problem is absolutely a UK problem. We import far too much and we don't make enough. And I'm going to come back on later on to the point that every time we talk about manufacturing, we always talk about manufacturing as if it's an export industry. We never talk about manufacturing production for domestic consumption. One of the single sharpest and biggest growth opportunities we could have in Scotland is if we made more of what we consume here and imported less cheaply from China. We'll talk about how in a second, hope. So this productivity question is really important because the value, the question you should always ask if you're looking at economy is where is the value created and where is the profit extracted? So if we use the model that we've got just now, the value is actually created in China. So the place where you start with something that becomes worth more at the end of the process is all in China, because that's what manufacturing is. You start with something, you end with something, and the value is created in the labour, the process, the application of labour to technology and labour to raw materials in the oldest possible sense. Now that value is done in low pay places so that the value is taken not by the employee in these economies, but by the company that owns the capital, the materials and so on. So that is all done in another country. Where is the profit extracted? Well, it's you. 100% of the, more or less 100% of the profit of the retail sector comes from your pockets. Do they put more of the profits that come out of your pockets back into the economy than they take out? Well, no, obviously not, because they're profitable. To be profitable, they have to extract more than they put in. So the value is created overseas and the profit is extracted in Scotland. We don't make. When you make, you need skills. Skills are high value, you pay, and that takes me on to the third crucial analysis about the Scottish economy, which is its interconnectedness and the extent to which we manage to sustain not just a business, but a system of business, an ecosystem around businesses. So we have a major problem that an enormous amount of companies cannot manage their supply chain domestically. So they cannot, you can have a company that makes things in Scotland, but the things it needs to make those things it cannot source from Scotland. Now this is exacerbated when your economy is owned overseas. So let me give you an example of how supply chain works. If you buy your sausages from Aldi's, Tesco, if somebody breaks Aldi's window or Tesco's window, it will almost certainly be another multinational which is the service contract to replace that window. So it'll probably be one of the many service companies that will come and put that window back in. So even if they get their window fixed, we lose the wealth. If you buy your sausages from a local butcher's and their window gets put in, a local joiner will put that window back in. That local joiner will buy their sausages from the shop. If the joiner needs to get some new PowerPoints put in, they will get those put in by a local electrician. And so what you have is a sustained economy. Now, I don't want to go on much longer because I want to get into some solutions and I know time is a wee bit tight here. But what you have is a very uneven economy where you have some absolutely world-leading, first-class, high-tech manufacturers, but they're surrounded by no one that can supply them or do the maximum amount of their work with local suppliers or with the indigenous suppliers who they can develop long-term relationships with. And all of these things mean that we lose far too much of the value of our economy overseas into other places. And let me give you an example. Scotland is a very large exporter of potatoes. We send a lot of potatoes out of Scotland. There is not a single crisp making facility in Scotland. You have never ate a crisp that was made in Scotland. So we send our potatoes away to get made into crisps by a multinational who sends them back to us, we buy them again and you eat the crisps. Now, if you were going to be active, you might say, is there the scope to sustain a crisp making facility in Scotland? How would we go about it? How would we do that? Is there then the capacity to get a distribution system, which means these crisps can get to market in Scotland to Scottish consumers, etc., etc. Now, if you do that, you get a process whereby what I describe as the economy grows up together. So we've got an uneven economy where some are so good that the others can't catch up to play with them. I don't mean compete with them, to play with them, to work with them. We need to lift the whole economy up collectively and improve its capacity at all parts. Now that's why I'm critical of Scottish Enterprise's policy of picking 5 or 6 priority areas and focusing on them. The only thing that matters is everything you do. And that's really important. There is no part of the economy which you should not be focusing on. I'm going to give you an example. In the 70s in Scotland and in Norway, I'll pick Sweden, Scotland and Sweden, forestry was a job done by men in lumberjack shirts chopping down trees with axes. In Sweden, they decided that was an inefficient way to go about it, and they invested heavily and supported the innovation of the timber industry. They now have an advanced materials industry which is based in wood, where they can make cross-laminated wooden beams which are as strong, almost as strong as steel. This is a computer-intensive, incredibly high-tech industry with big export capacity. And we are still chopping down trees with big men and axes. That's what happens if you don't support the development of every part of your economy. There isn't a bit of the economy which cannot improve and which will not benefit from improvement. The last thing I'm going to say about analysis, and this one is really important, and in this one in particular, I think the Scottish Government is failing on just now, which is that economic development is not a macro issue. It is not a theoretical spreadsheet issue that applies to Scotland as a whole. So it means, I was up in Longannet a couple of weeks ago at the launch of the regeneration programme after the power station's been closed down. It means nothing to them to say that you've secured a whole host of call centre jobs in Glasgow. If we do not match economic activity to the places where people live, the economy will fail all by itself. Now, I have family connections to Motherwell, and I can tell where the contractors were staying are now all sitting empty. And the newsagents, where a lot of the people bought their paper in the morning, can't sustain things. And then you find that the people that own the bed and breakfasts can't spend in the local economy, so the grocers starts to close down. And now this process gets to the point where you can't sustain the pub. Now, I know this is going to sound a wee bit narrow, but the pub is a phenomenally important indicator of the economic health of a place. Healthy places have pubs. They have that kind of community resource which people go to. The second you see a pub closing down, you know there's a problem. Pubs are closing down all over Scotland. It's an indicator of the fact that we don't take place as a key economic indicator. It's managed by Scottish Enterprise in Glasgow on spreadsheets on the basis that, well, you know, on aggregate, the jobs are doing okay. Yeah, because lots of low-paid jobs have aggregated in some places while losing lots of high-paid jobs that have been lost from others. We need to reconnect economics to place. Right, so that was an incredibly, insanely fast rattle through an analysis of some of the things that we should be thinking about to address when we look at our economy. What do we do? Right, number one, we've got to get our finance right. I don't want to go into this extensively just now because there really isn't time, but if you have an interest, just read around a little bit just now in any of the main newspapers, any of the main journals or websites to look at the discussion of what's happening in global capitalism, what's happening around the world. Everywhere now has identified the fact that the financialization of the economy has destroyed the productive economy. So what we've seen over the last 30 or 40 years is a process where banks now make their money through sheer speculation and from a whole bunch of rent-seeking activities. So back in the day, a bank would give you money, it would get the interest in the loan, and that was sufficient. Made it a good solid profit, and it made Edinburgh the safe, solid banking capital of the world. Edinburgh is where you came for solid banking. And then it was deregulated, and suddenly it became very easy to make massively more profits by doing anything apart from serving customers. Finance stopped being something which supported an economy and started being something that made profit all by itself. Now, if you talk to people, they will tell you over and over, anyone that's in business, anyone that's in industry, they will tell you again and again that one of the problems is the nature of borrowing. Not that they can't borrow, and this is a myth that kicks around quite a bit. Oh, there's plenty of loans for small business. Oh yeah, there's plenty of 3-year loans at high interest rates. But that's not what our economy needs. Our economy is very bad at patient investment over 10-year, 20-year, 30-year timeframes. I'm going to come on to housing in a second. You don't want to borrow for house building on a 5-year basis. These are long-term assets. Now, other places support these with banks that do long-term patient lending, enable growth, enable joint. I mean, remember that the bank manager in the day used to be like a partner with the business. If the business went down the tubes, the bank didn't get the money back, therefore the bank manager wanted the business to succeed. And we've just seen the RBS model, which is completely the opposite. The bank gives them a small loan, tries to bankrupt them to take their assets. Now that's a heavily dysfunctional financial system. The first thing that we should do, and we put a detailed proposal together in this. We spent 6 months going through the legal work. We did it jointly with the New Economics Foundation because that's quite technical. The proposal for establishing a Scottish National Investment Bank. And we've got it, it can be done. Scotland could have a Scottish National Investment Bank in collective ownership, which was capable of lending over £10 billion into the Scottish economy in 2 or 3 years' time if we wanted to do it. Now, this is really important. Again, there's so much I'm trying to cover here. There's an awful lot of talk in the Scottish Parliament about that deal with the China Railway Company number 3 falling through and how the debacle it was. The debacle is that we're still taking that as being a beneficial aid to our economy. That money was not going to put more money, that investment by China was not putting more money in our economy, it was taking more money out of our economy. They were going to invest in wind power, which is zero risk and high return. They were going to invest in social housing, which is zero risk and high return. They were going to give us 10 billion to extract lots and lots of wealth from our economy. We can comfortably match every penny that China Railway Company number 3 was going to bring to Scotland from within Scotland. Now, they weren't doing it philanthropically. They were doing it because it benefits them. Why don't we do it so it benefits us? That's what a Scottish National Investment Bank would have done. So the model that we proposed, Scottish National Investment Bank, gives the large lending to local authorities, to the Scottish Government itself, to the large enterprises and big initiatives. And underneath that, we were proposing, quite closely based on the German model, local development banks. So below that level, you have a series of banks whose purpose is not to make profit, but to promote economic development and sustainable economic activity on a local basis. That's the same for the National Investment Bank as a different remit, which incidentally is one of the ways that you can get it past European Union aid laws, is to say, no, it's not a normal bank, it's a bank with a different purpose. And you have those locally. The purpose of these banks is to develop long-term relationships with local business to help them to build and grow. And incidentally, local development banks can become retail banks as well, so you can put your money in. You can keep your cash in a local bank. You don't have to go to RBS. Once again, all legal, can all be done with the powers of the Scottish Parliament. So the next thing I'm going to suggest is that having got a finance system in place, you can immediately do effectively Keynesian stimulation. So there are things that you can do almost straight away which would create an immediate spike in economic activity. The obvious one is house building. So if you create, again, our proposal, you can do it in a couple of ways. You could do it through the local authorities. We proposed a Scottish National Housing Company, which would borrow, I've got a bit of a cold, so excuse me, which would borrow over 30-year timeframes. Now, if you can borrow over 30-year timeframes, which you can do from a Scottish National Investment Bank, then houses, you can build unlimited housing, or rather housing limited only by people who want to live in it. Now, there's a whole lot of housing talk I can do, but primarily, you could get to a situation where we have, not the 1970s, I'm not a lefty that looks back to the 1970s, I'm a lefty that looks back to the 1950s. We could have a 1950s style where we would have a list, and anybody who wants a first-rate, incredibly well manufactured, high quality, spacious, nicely designed public sector rental housing could put their name in a list. And however many names were on that list, that's how many you'd build. It's unlimited. The model that we've developed means that the rents, modest, sensible rents, would repay the loan. So this is cost-free. And if you do that properly, if you start to produce large German-style technical house factories where lasers and computers are building entire houses and kits in high quality, you're also doing an important job in pulling the quality of the economy up. You can decide where to put them. You can say we're going to put a house building factory next to Long Annet because we've got an economic development issue there, so let's going to focus some of the work there. You can choose where you're going to stimulate that work. This would be a large number of high-paid jobs, because they're skilled jobs, a large number of high-paid jobs which you could stimulate immediately. And if we did that, we could also change the building and construction industry in Scotland. We built a house a few years ago. Anyone that's built a house, if we could get to a point where, like the Germans, everyone turns up in time, finishes and goes home again in time, that in itself would be pleasant. A side benefit. We can do the same on a number of other areas. So what you're looking for is anything which generates income. Anything that the private sector is investing in, we can invest in, collectively and publicly, and stimulate it now. Obvious one's energy. Now, it's all got a bit messed up because the UK's handling of energy tariffs is a nightmare. And we started doing work on this, and then they changed everything, and we kind of did other things. We need to come back and look at it again. But if you're generating income from solar, from renewable, from any form of renewables, from solar, from wind, from offshore, from tidal, but also from energy storage. I wish I could do my energy storage talk, but I'm not allowed because I've got to get through this. Energy storage is a big, big deal. We lose an awful lot of renewables because of when they come. If you put storage in, you can double or triple the capacity that you've already got. This is an emerging technology which we can invest in heavily. So not only do we put a new infrastructure of energy in Scotland, but we could become world leaders in modern battery technology, liquid air storage technology, which gives us the capacity to develop an export industry. There are others. I'm going to stop. So not stop. I'm going to stop that bit. So that's an immediate spike stimulation thing that you could do. So immediately you say we'll boost the economy. All of these have the usual knock-on effects. The next thing, and this one I am very frustrated about. We spend about £10 billion a year on public procurement. And for reasons which are beyond me, we design it in such a way that Scottish businesses can never get the contract. Now, we've shown the economic benefit in this. We've shown the social benefit in this. We've shown the efficiencies are not bad by doing it this way. But the big corporations really have far too close a relationship with procurement managers. So everywhere else in Europe almost everywhere else in Europe breaks their contracts down in smaller size to enable domestic industries to compete for those contracts. We package them up into the biggest possible deals. And these deals, there's all sorts of problems with these deals. Like I said, I stay in bigger. They knocked down our primary school because they had an X number of schools construction deal. And it would have been cheaper to have extended the old primary school, which was perfectly fine, a big solid Victorian building, but they didn't have an extension contract, they built a new school contract, so they knocked it down and built another one across the road. And of course that wasn't a Scottish-owned company. You cannot, go out and talk to a producer in Scotland. You cannot make sausages in Scotland and sell them to your local school. It's not doable. You can't supply them. You can't supply bread, you can't supply potatoes, you can't supply food. If you were to decide that you were going to become a major pencil manufacturer, or a pencil manufacturer in Scotland, your chances that you'll be able to sell a pencil to the public sector are slim. So this is easy. Break up big public contracts and spread them. I could explain the legalities of this. European Union law means that you do have to put them out for competitive tender, but if you make them the right size, you favour a different kind of producer, a different kind of contractor to get those contracts. So we can do this straight away, immediately. You can do even more with this if you're clever with procurement policy. Now the SNP did this once and then seemed to lose its flavour for it, which was you can add criteria to contracts which enable you to opt out of competitive tender, particularly if you're doing something advanced or research intensive. So when a CalMac was producing a ferry for the Northern Isles, The Scottish Government said we want to commission an advanced electric ferry. It's a ferry which doesn't use petrochemical fuels. And because it was a high-tech development and it's had research relevant to the domestic economy, you can put an exemption in. So if you've got a high research and development element to a contract, you can put that in the contract and you can hand contracts to domestic companies. We can use we can use those techniques, not just to direct jobs into our economy, but as a tool for actively saying, for example, why don't we procure our IT in such a way that we're actively building an IT sector in Scotland to support the public sector? It can be advanced technology, it can be open source, it can be whatever we want it to be. We've got to stop seeing public procurement as a big bundle of money where we want to save 5 or 10 pence by getting multinationals to undercut domestic business, and start to see it as something that we are using as a crucial tool for injecting money into the economy. Next, other ways to support the smaller business sector, and I'll hopefully have time to come back onto the bigger business sector in a minute. We've just launched, I hope everyone's doing their Christmas shopping in Common Market. I hope you've all seen it. So we've launched, commonmarket.scot, we've launched an online retailer for small Scottish producers to enable them to get access to Scottish markets. Because we do quite a bit of policy work with small producers. And they always tell us the same thing. Nobody from the small producer sector has ever said to us, what we want is a 2% reduction in our rates bills. Never once has anyone said that. What they say is we want market access. High streets are colonised by multinationals selling Chinese stuff. Internet is now colonised by a number of big retailers selling Chinese stuff. We can't get to our producers, to our consumers, to our market. We have to link people to market. We have to think about how we help producers get access to Scottish customers. Now, when I was talking earlier on about the extent to which the domination of multinational corporations has distorted parts of the economy, which are not just them, distribution is one of them. We used to have companies which were distribution companies. You could hire a company to distribute your produce to another part of Scotland. John Menzies was one of the biggest of them. So you could say, right, I want to ship this here, and you had a distribution system. But because all the supermarkets have now brought them in-house, and each of them have their own distribution systems, there are no independent distribution systems in Scotland. If you want to get potatoes from one part of Scotland to the other, you're parcel forcing it. Now, that's madness. It's no surprise that people can't get access to markets if that's how we're doing things. We need to think about modern distribution systems. Now, at the small end of things, I could say, come on, Scottish Government, let's tell everybody in the public sector that first port of call for small purchases which don't have to go through competitive tender is a business gateway for Scottish businesses. So just say to them, if you buy light bulbs, go online to a Scottish supplier, perfectly legal, go online to a Scottish supplier website and buy them locally. You can do that, that's a simple thing. At the far end, things are going to change a lot in distribution. As you already know, mail as it was, post as it was, is changing, and we all regularly get big parcel deliveries. Distribution is going to change. Why don't we think about exploring a national distribution system where local authorities are delivering to your house on a reduced cost regularly, 2 days a week? As soon as that happens, suddenly selling your high-quality sausages to consumers in your area becomes realistic, because you've got a distribution system that supports that. I could talk a lot more about that. I won't. I have to keep moving on, and I'm not going to get on to the rest of the stuff that I want to talk about. But there's other things. Let me talk about, and since it's Friday night, I can do this either apple juice or cider. But it looks at you lot, I'm going to do cider. There were 2 ways to make cider in the past. You could do a wee guy or woman hand cranking craft cider from a small orchard. It's exhausting, not very productive. Or you could have a massive orchard with a giant big industrial plant juicing all the apples from an orchard. And that was your options. These are no longer our options. You can now have what they call right-sized processing. So you can get an Arctic lorry, with a mobile juicing plant, which can drive to an orchard, juice the entire orchard in a few days, day or two, drive to the next orchard, and the next orchard. Now that principle of right size means that multiple medium-sized manufacturing productive industries can share infrastructure. So we work with a couple of groups who do micro-manufacture, laser cutting, 3D printing, etc., etc. Lots of them can keep advanced machinery going 15% of the week. None of them can keep it going 100% of the week. So why are we not supporting them to come together in public cooperatives of materials of infrastructure to ensure that we've got it for everybody? Now I know that some of these groups have talked to Scottish Enterprise, and Scottish Enterprise say, oh, state aid. If we start building state factories to compete with that state aid, nonsense. You can absolutely do it, particularly if you're doing it as supporting cooperatives. You can absolutely do this kind of thing. It makes the capacity for medium-scale production substantially bigger. And in food in particular, we have a phenomenal food producing country where we still eat crap that's imported, low quality crap that's imported, because we don't support the production and processing crisps. We don't support the production and processing of foods in Scotland for Scottish markets. These are major jumps. Now, I should say, well, if any of this doesn't sound, I haven't even said biotech or microprocessing yet. I should say as well, 70% of an economy is cornflakes. You know, it's just normal stuff. You buy in the shops, the milk, your cornflakes, you go to the garage to get your tyre fixed. That's the vast majority of the economy. Only about 30% of the economy is anywhere near exporting or fancy goods. So all that core stuff is the stuff we never look at. Where do we make our cornflakes? How are our garages supported? Independent garages as opposed to, you know, Costco or whatever it is. Are we creating an environment that enables them to survive? And particularly in the high-tech area, one of the things that they always tell us is it is really easy if you're a multinational corporation to come up with a new product to secure IP protection, to secure all of the asset protection, to get the export supports that enable you to export to another country, because they can have a department that does it for this team, this team there, and this team there. If you're small, you have to buy it bespoke each time individually, and that's very expensive. That's a difficult way to go about handling these things. Once again, there is no reason the public sector couldn't create a unit, hire IP lawyers and export support, and enable lots of smaller suppliers to get together. If you think all of this sounds fanciful, I'm going to encourage you to look at one of Scotland's giant economic success stories of recent years, which is craft brewing. Craft brewing didn't exist barely 10 years ago. That idea of lots of small-scale producers selling high-quality products to local producers didn't exist. And I've become conscious of this as I looked at the economics of it more, and we're also involved in the Scottish Food Coalition, which is doing the same thing but coming from a different direction. I was in York talking to our counterparts, the Yorkshire Party, who's campaigning for autonomy for Yorkshire. They asked me in to talk to their annual conference. So I spent the day in York, and I suddenly realised, oh, we have totally different beers in our pubs now than they do. We have Scottish craft beers, and they have Yorkshire craft beers. Now, this is a massive success story. If we can do it with beer, we can do it with other things. And it's also really interesting. I know an economist who did some work on the growth of craft brewers, and he was talking to one supplier and he says, what's the next barrier? What's the next thing? And that supplier says, well, the difficulty we've got now is not just the ability to export, but the ability to sustain it. They were offered a big export deal, been a massive step up for the company. But they would have had to put up a lot of investment in to scale up for this big export order with no guarantees that another one was coming. They can't scale up, scale down, scale up, scale down. So what we have to do is think about developing support for the private sector, from the small, medium-scale, independent private sector, which enables them to deal with ups and downs in market demand for their products, that supports them. There's quite a lot more I could say about small producers. I've become particularly interested in the concept of import substitution. The more that we buy, which isn't imported, the more we're becoming a more sustainable economy. And it's that simple. Right, I'm trying to judge, how much more shall we stop? 5 minutes. Right, okay. Let me then pick up the question of larger scale economic development activities and what we're going to do. This is a big area. If you look at Scotland, there are big successful manufacturers, Weir pumps, and there's a number of them, which are doing well, we should be keeping supporting. There are a whole bunch of the other big players which we assume are quite big. You've got banks, and you've got airports now are a big player, and you've got energy companies. And yet they're not necessarily what you would want as the big players in Scotland if you were designing big players. Now, I know this is being live streamed, and I'm not supposed to talk about them because they're doing so well they can't keep up with demand. But I'm going to say there are models which take things at that scale on, which we could consider developing in Scotland once again to capture more of the economic market in Scotland. So there's an Edinburgh-based initiative company called Our Power. Has anyone heard of Our Power? Oh, they're doing the keep it secret well. Our Power was basically started up as a cooperative between a whole bunch of housing associations. And what they do is they've set up as an energy distribution company. What they do is they offer simplified, flat rate energy, gas, electricity, directly to the members of those housing associations at a flat rate. It's a non-profit entity. Now, this is a model which would be very interesting because what we are doing once again is creating a large industry sector which we are keeping in Scotland. We are holding the wealth in Scotland. And incidentally, the thing that stops them from growing as fast as they otherwise would is access to finance. Banks don't finance in a way that enables them to take that kind of a risk. A Scottish National Investment Bank would enable them to scale up, and I could talk about them in public. You can't get your energy, they're oversubscribed. They can't expand fast enough for the demand. We can do things like this. The SNP manifesto had a very vague statement in it about a national energy distribution company. That is a great opportunity. You should be looking at that. We should be looking at emerging. To my opinion, we made an arse of wave power. We did it in a patchy, private sector-y kind of a way. We should have just created a national wave power centre, put our money behind it. And remember, you can build it's harder to nationalise an industry. It's not difficult to start a national industry. We can do these kinds of things. And I think I better stop by saying, now if all of this sounds like I am in some way saying we've got to do everything in small, patchy, no, we also need to develop big industry sectors. We also need to be aware of the potential for doing the higher end activity in our economy. And I think the last concept that I'm going to leave you with, apart from the fact that we should have an industrial policy which takes everything I've said today and the many things I'm not going to get a chance to say and wraps them up together and says, we are not content to sit back and let things play out as they are. We are going to intervene to shape the economy for the benefit of Scotland, for the benefit of people, for the benefit of places. An industrial policy is something which has now been seriously discussed all over the world. And laissez-faire hasn't worked. Well, it has if you're a big financier. But for countries, laissez-faire hasn't worked. So we need to move towards a better economic development system. I think I'd now frankly get rid of Scottish enterprise. I think I would take local economic development and push it out to the local authorities and say, no, place-based economic development is for local authorities and resource them to do that. Export supports, SDI, and what we do in export support, of course we've got to keep a hold of that, but that could be an entity in itself. Skills development, you'll notice I haven't mentioned skills here. And we could do with more STEM people, but the idea that you can have skills-led economic development is now discredited. We've been educating kids out their ears for years, and what do you know? Giving someone a degree doesn't mean there's a job for them. And the idea that there's all these jobs floating out there, and all we needed to do was produce the people, and if we could produce them, suddenly these graduate-shaped holes would all be filled and the economy would go great, is a myth. Labour's still rattling on about this because Labour can't get beyond that. It's wrong. We shouldn't be looking at this idea of a skills-led growth. It doesn't work. But there are many things that we can do. I should have said we've got a report on this. All this stuff's on our website, in the library, allofusfirst.org in the library. We've got a paper called Towards an Industrial Policy that would explain how you would do some of these things. I was going to finish off with, I was about to tell you something. Oh yes, yeah, a concept that I wanted to leave you with. However, we don't want to be a small island. I'm going to say that absolutely the future is localism. Globalization has not worked, hasn't worked. We cannot afford to ship goods all over the world frivolously anymore. The period when Scottish seafood was being frozen, sent, shelled in Hong Kong or East Asia, to be brought back down south, to be packaged and sent back up here, those days are coming to an end. For environmental reasons, for resource reasons, for political reasons, that has to come to an end. So localism and the idea of relocalizing economies is going to be a global solution to global warming and all sorts of other things. But we will always be an international trading species. We're not going to be isolationists. That's not what any of this is about. But let's start exporting on the basis of sustainable quality. Now, the concept that I want to leave on that is the concept of smart specialization. We have now been rattling on for a long time about trying to work out who is there, how do we make them more competitive in international exports. Now, why, oh why, this is not just my peacenik coming through, why oh why we are giving £5 million a year to highly profitable arms manufacturers who are already based in Scotland is a bit beyond me. Why we're giving millions of pounds to Amazon, one of the world's most successful companies, to put a distribution centre into a market which is making them a lot of money, I do not understand. So this idea that to be more competitive, we've got to look at existing players and take away and give them bribes, or no, that's not what we should be doing. What we should be doing is asking a simple question. What can we do better than other people? How well can we do it? And how do we compete internationally in that? Smart specialization. This is one of the great successes of the Nordic economies. They don't try to do everything. They don't try to ape big multinational corporations or large economies. They say, we can't make large electric cars all in one, because the running's being made by Volkswagen, by Ford, by so and so and so. But there's a bit of this car, I don't know, I'm just making this up now, but there's a bit of this car, the laser guidance, now that we can do really, really well. We're especially good at this because we're especially smart at this thing. We should specialize at that thing. Don't try to compete on what we're not good at, and compete very aggressively on what we are good at. Now, Scotland in this regard is filled with smarts. We really are. We have great universities. They are putting out very high-skilled people. We need to start to think about reorientating our economic development approach to say, what do we do better than others, and how do we make ourselves do that better, export it well, and develop? And incidentally, one of the interesting answers to that is, it is rare, not unknown, but it is rare to have a sea of mediocrity with one great company popping out of it. Another lesson of the Nordics is what I was talking about earlier on about growing up together. It's when you have clusters, when you have families of strong and innovative. See, I haven't even talked about innovation or productivity. That's really frustrating. Strong, innovative companies which are capable of doing this, growing up together. We have a cluster of optoelectronics doing different specialisms, cluster of biotechs doing different specialism, cluster of, and of course, Scotland is slipping through our fingers, renewable technologies. We are losing renewable technologies because they're all being developed in this country by importing, once again, importing Chinese wind turbines and sticking them up in our hills and calling that a success story. That is not a success story. So, it's a Friday night. I can't believe you sat through all of this already. There is lots that we can do. Start by getting the infrastructure right, the knowledge right, and the base right. Move on to working out what it is about our economy that's strong, what's weak, how do we fix it, how do we build on it, and then start to take actions, things that you can specifically do immediately. If we do that, there is absolutely no reason that Scotland cannot be what it should be, an absolutely thriving nation, just like the Nordics. And I haven't talked about maritime, and thanks. Oh, you've got to talk in your mic.
Well, it's time for questions, and that is questions, not speeches, please. And let's get the discussion going. And if you would just pass this around as we go. So I'll maybe start with Barry, who doesn't really need a microphone. But
yeah, but for the folks out there.
Okay, I'm sure I can hit the folks on Princess Street from here, but...
It's for the live stream.
Okay, are you getting it through there? One big thing, you said you didn't come on to innovation, so if I can raise that. We see all the time. I was once in a quiz, and my specialist subject was Scottish inventions and innovations. You have no idea how big a subject that was. But we see all the time on our TV, Dragon's Den. We see a bunch of very overprivileged people with, albeit a few, stupid ideas, but taking a whole pile of good ideas, screwing the people who have come up with them and that have built up their business from the start, and taking things. Why do we not have, as a nation, effectively a national Dragon's Den, where we're asking people to come, to pitch, and obviously you're only taking good, productive ideas with potential. In return for that, we're taking a government share, and we're taking a golden share, which means that that company, as it grows, cannot then be sold out and export the jobs in Scotland. You could provide them with finance, which is usually very small in Dragon's Den, the finance element. What they're looking for is expertise, contacts, access. Now, surely as a country, we can supply that. Surely we can ask the companies already here to supply mentoring and such like. We can supply marketing expertise, patenting expertise, and all the rest of it. And we can take thousands of new ideas coming through Scotland. Take a share, take 10%, 15%, something realistic, not the 50% that they screw them for and that thing. No, right, you might back 70% winners, 30% losers. That's fine, because it's enough. Do you think this is a viable idea?
Yes.
There's the question.
Yes. No, don't cut off, because that's really interesting. There are a whole load of ways you can do this. What you've just described is largely what I've described as development banks. Those should be the Dragon's Dens, in association, working with a local authority. Now, this is a big answer, but we should have another layer of local democracy in Scotland, and that hyper-local. For example, we think we do tourism well. We don't do tourism well in Scotland. We don't encourage our domestic people to go. So that lowest level of local democracy would, for example, put together packages and promote tourism in a local area. There's a case for some mergers of the big local authorities if we did that. And you'd have an Ayrshire authority and a Lanarkshire authority. And they would then have a development bank and the economic development role. And incidentally, they would also potentially put the infrastructure in support. So the idea that you've got to put the Dragon's Den boys, I don't watch it, I can't abide it, but they're always looking for a way to get the export manager into their company. Well, I'm not suggesting that maybe don't need an export manager in the company. They need shared access to that. You could put the infrastructure in place. And that partnership between a local development bank and a local authority carrying the economic development and support role ought to be able, and incidentally, again, I didn't go into it, but a different banking model can take that share model. You take a share in the company, which means that you've absolutely got a long-term commitment to the company that you've funded, and you can create that Dragon's Den model. They need money, they need expertise, they need support, and I know this is going to sound daft, but they need to feel loved. When you're going through, I'm sure many of you know, when you're going through an enterprise, building stuff up, it can be scary and lonely, particularly at moments when you're quite exposed, when you've got a lot of money out. And knowing that you've got people behind you that want you to succeed and are there to support you is important. So we could do it in a number of ways, but frankly, I would straightforwardly do that. I would straightforwardly say development bank, local authority, local areas, you go in and you pitch people good ideas. But just one other on that, the idea of innovation labs and hubs. We have a lot of bright kids coming out of our universities and schools. One of the things which I'm quite in favour of is we could set up a fund for innovative app development. So apps being phone apps or whatever. These are going to be a big, big way forward. We've been talking about this in open government. It's another project we're working on. Where what you're doing is you're saying to people, have innovative ways of creating applications which help people better access public services and or do things in their society to help them out. Innovative, socially minded apps. And part of the point of that is you're creating an app developing community. These are important and valuable and profitable, and you're finding ways to stimulate them while also getting social value out of it. Dragon's Den's not right. It's not about the dog eat dog who wins. It's absolutely not about vulture. They say venture capitalism. It's not. It's vulture capitalism. It's absolutely not about that. But the principle is exactly right. Support, sustain, finance, help, grow, build, and do it in an environment where others can do the same.
Could you pass that on, Barry? Who was up here?
Thanks very much, Chair. I find Robin's stuff intensely interesting, and I'm a retired businessman or small businessman from Leith originally, and so I've gone through all of these problems that Robin's talking about, and he's absolutely certain that's true. Right now, I'm kind of a retiring councillor for the Independent People's Republic of Lochalie and Cardendane, but I'll be finished that soon. I've done a 10-year stint, but I'm so interested in what Barry was saying and yourself, because it's problems I've been talking about for years, except nobody bloody listens, you know. But it's the same thing happens. You talked about crisps earlier. Golden Wonder used to have a big factory in Livingston, I think it was, or Winchborough. Broxburn it was, and we campaigned against it. But you see, the problem is we need an answer, Robin, and maybe you can supply it. You know, an entrepreneur builds up a company, and then he quite rightly wants to sell it on to glean the profit from that and maybe make his family feel better. We need some sort of lock-in mechanism, as Barry's talked about. And it used to happen in Scotland. There was a company called Britoil, which was 50% private investment and 50% government, but the government had a golden share, and so they could stop things happening. Unfortunately, Thatcher got her hands on it and sold the whole bloody lot. Mm-hmm. But the theory is right. If we get Scottish Enterprise, or Son of Scottish Enterprise, to take an equity investment in a small entrepreneurial high-risk company, then we should use that equity as part of the conditions of the agreement that the company couldn't move out of Scotland or employment without the express consent of that share that's held by the government, or if you want, the Landspankie, which was a Finnish idea that you're talking about, really. They would have that power. So really, just how do we lock in entrepreneurs to sustain their business through generation to generation? Yeah,
right. This is really interesting because one of the examples that I use quite often is the fact that for the speckies out there, maybe we're not too old now, for the younger speckies out there, disposable contact lenses were invented in Scotland. They were invented in Scotland using money invested by the Scottish, by the Scotland office as then was, and they were all manufactured, all the world's disposable contact lenses were manufactured in Livingston. Now, that company is doing incredibly well. It's now making a hell of a lot of disposable contact lenses. I think it's in Portland, Oregon, because the guy sold out and the whole company with the IP left Scotland. And we've got no jobs out of that discovery whatsoever. Now, there's a number of factors here. We refer to this in industrial policy as anchoring strategies. It's to anchor anchoring businesses into the economy. It pains me when I see governments putting out press releases expressing success in the fact that some Scottish companies sold out. Wolfston Electronics,
I worked with them,
did you spun out of Glasgow University, global potential business, get bought over by an American venture company. I think it was an American venture company. Oh no, it was one of the big Japanese. And the Scottish government puts out a press release saying, "Brilliant!" And I'm sitting there going, "What do you mean brilliant? This is a catastrophe. We've lost another industry." Okay, anchoring strategies. One, you're right. Number one above all, change this stinking culture of business. Fucking Dragon's Den. if you look at the model which we should be following, it's the German Mittelstand. Now, for those that don't know it, the Mittelstand is a term for a strand of industry in Germany. It literally means middle-sized, but it means more than that now. Mittelstand enterprises are characterized by a number of things. First of all, they're family-owned. And when I say family-owned, it's multiple generations of family who own them. For a Mittelstand company, manager, owner, to not pass that company on to the next generation of his family is an embarrassment and humiliation. A sellout is a failure. Your job is to build a good business and pass it on. That's success. And that's what's admired. That's what your admiration for your success is, not how much you sold out for, but how well you built locally. Another key factor for that, which we can't do here, but there's always conditionality in the loans, is in Germany, of course, a third of the board is made up of employees. Now, you'll be unsurprised to hear that employees are much less prone, who are non-shareholders, are much less prone to selling out businesses. In fact, really interestingly, quite a number of Mittelstand companies have local community on their board. They are so rooted that the local community, they've been big employers in the area for 60 years, and they invite local community onto the board. Once again, it's an anchoring and rooting strategy that keeps them there.
But we'll sell shares to the employees in the direction.
They can sell shares, you can cooperative, you can social
They
enterprise.
sell them on. So it's not really
Not if you do it right. This is another big problem that we've got in this country. And I would have mentioned this in innovation if I'd got a chance to get onto innovation. It's a bit bad that I missed innovation. There's about another 3 things as well, incidentally, which I just realised there I didn't get onto either, but I better not. But yes, absolutely. If you root and lock in, and you have the whole community, I didn't talk about social enterprise, I didn't talk about community enterprise, I didn't talk about cooperatives. All of these are important models. These can all have anchoring strategies. We don't have a Mittelstand tradition in the same way. And I'm not suggesting that we can simply replicate it, but we've got to try to get into that direction. And you can give shares to employees. But because we treat employees as virtually disposable commodities far too much in our economy, so we play as little as we can. And in Britain nowadays, we have contracts which mean we commit as little as we can commit to the employee. They have no return commitment. So if you're getting minimum wage and you have a choice of selling off employee shares, as I went, well, you go and get another minimum wage job somewhere. But if you're working in a business which is working for you, which is delivering for you, which is high skill, you don't sell up. You don't sell out your future 20 years of employment in a good job for the sake of a big cash bung. So the nature of the enterprises that we are building matters too. The other thing that's really interesting about Mittelstand is, and I saw this in the telly thing, they went around the car park with a camera and they said, right, pick the gaffer's car. A really interesting thing is that you couldn't. They're all driving BMWs because they pay their staff properly and they don't take insane amounts of money out. They're not constantly vampirizing, draining the life from their own business to buy yachts. They live a good life. They have a nice car. They have a nice house. They're not skint. They go on holiday. But they don't take everything out that they can. And we've got, the circular economy is used in our context. We've got what I call a sawtooth economy. Start a business, build it up, sell it. Use the money to start another business, or probably buy property, sell it. And it's like a sawtooth, up and down. You keep building, you make the equity all the way through. Good economy, good businesses take minimum, surplus is good. Right? Surplus is good. A business that creates a surplus is a successful business. A business that takes that surplus out as profit is a worse business than one that recommits the surplus back into the business. That circular model is what Mittelstands do. And Mittelstands are not small. An example, those that have got a pressure washer, it's probably, I can't really pronounce it, Karcher, they're a Mittelstand. Family owned for 50 years. Everybody's well paid, really good industrial relations, really popular. I saw interviews with people. The boss doesn't have an office. The boss is based in a bit off the shop floor. It doesn't look like, I was going to swear there. It doesn't look like the people on Dragon's Den. Who's that awful Michelle Moan with her penthouse apartment and look at me. Doesn't look like her. Doesn't look like them at all. It's a different model. So there's a whole range of ways we can do this. Finance is the most obvious. We will give you money, but you're not selling up, and we will block it. And that's the deal for a publicly supported finance deal that helps you grow, and your give back is you stay.
Another question?
I should go faster.
Yeah, someone will be good.
Just quick facts.
Go to the back.
Hey, I'll get it right.
And then along the back towards Paul.
Oh, now they've totally ducked you.
And then back to you.
Just to
You
follow
get
on,
plenty of shots.
I think
Come on.
she might fall asleep there.
I'll go faster.
just to follow on with what you were saying, and what do you think there's a need for legislation? I mean, too often it seems to me we're just delighted to get factories or employees to come here because of the jobs, and really there's no stipulation on them to do anything. And one thinks of West Lothian and the Silicon Valley. They were a lot of those companies were given huge grants to come and set up factories here, and then when they discovered, labour in China was cheaper, they're up and off, and there was no penalty if they just cleared off. And there were each worker that was made redundant got a decent payoff, whereas in Scotland they were just made redundant and that was it. So I think we need to have much more. I think government's afraid of making legislation because they're so desperate to get industry to come.
Yep.
They'll offer them anything.
It's not even
Whereas-
legislation. This is just contractual deals if you get the
Yeah,
money.
yeah.
Now, first of all, there was an episode of Sherlock which said something, but Benedict Cumberbatch, in which some guy was playing an evil multinational and he said something that was really important, because it actually was really important. He said, I'm coming over to take over the economy of Britain, and if that works, I'm going to go to a proper country and try it there too. Now, what they meant by that is Britain is ideologically in the West only after the United... In fact, we are more prone, more spineless in our engagement with multinationals even in America. America's much firmer as an open market. They're supposed to be the biggest open market. No, they're not. We are. We're pathetic about it. Please, big corporation, come over here because you'll make us look all shiny and new with your big warehouse. Oh, you want to leave? Well, it was fun for 5 years, thanks. We're a pushover. We don't put conditions in things. We throw money at people, and it's a stupid idea anyway. This was all very well in previous eras. So Silicon Glen, we had a skills advantage. So it just so happened that at that time we had a large volume of people who were capable of mid to higher skilled, mostly sub-university jobs in plant assembly. Now, we attracted companies to come, and there were financial inducements, but the biggest inducement was the skill set of the workforce. Now, that's fine. You want companies to come here because of our assets. If you're bribing them to come from low cost, number one, they're almost certainly the wrong kind of company. Yeah. A company that relocates for a fiver here and a fiver there is not the company you want, because they're clearly low margin. And second of all, just throwing money at them, they come. Is it what you want? So, I mean, obviously, we're not going to beat Amazon. They were coming anyway. But if you didn't give that 10 million to Amazon, what could you have done with it? You could have done other things with it. Inward investment has become one of the most misunderstood concepts. It's what I was saying about the China stuff. If we have a company that wants to come to Scotland, because for whatever reason it is, it's identified something in Scotland that we have that will help it do something good and productive and create jobs and wants to stay here, we should bite their hands off. Absolutely, we should invite them over. If they want to come here because they've noticed that we've got an asset which they can exploit instead of us, such as our wind power, well, we should ask ourselves, can we do it ourselves first? If the answer is no, fair enough, but we can do it ourselves first. We shouldn't be trying to coax them in. In fact, we should be trying to coax them out as far as we can. And if you have got people whose sole purpose is rent seeking and asset stripping, China deal number 3, we should have people at the airport to hit them with sticks, right? So we've got inward investment is great if it's real investment, and you can tell if it's risky, it's real. And if it's risk-free, it's rent-seeking. No more attracting risk-free investment, which comes here, takes wealth, goes away again, and it can't fail, and we're subsidising it. There was no risk in Amazon building a warehouse. We were not going to stop shopping in Amazon. They shouldn't have got a penny, and we should have been using that money to support indigenous business.
Okay. Jan, could you pass the microphone along? Could we take 2 or 3 questions before you answer?
Hi, Robin. Some really good ideas tonight, and I think a lot of them are quite contingent on finance. I work for one of these large banks and do balance sheet management, looking at the corporate balance sheet. A lot of research actually looking at German banks and how they finance things. So it kind of comes back to the Scottish National Investment Banking, kind of seems to be key to some of the ideas we've discussed. Might not be popular in this room, but I'm quite frustrated, I think, with some of the economic policy from the SNP or lack thereof. What do you think is the key barrier to them actually progressing this idea of a Scottish National Investment Bank? Why are they not looking at this or going forward with it?
Thank you. Just, could we have another question?
We're going to take a couple.
Pass it along. We'll just take a couple.
I don't think the Scottish enterprise is an accident. I think it's what it does is a very accurate reflection of how people think about local development. And I think if you were to ask any of the councillors in any of the big cities, they wouldn't say what you say. They would say what they think, which is mainly wrong. How does that change? How do we get something as simple as make not buy, which is what you're saying, conventional wisdom instead of let's give Amazon a lot of money?
I wonder if you see a possibility of a Scot coin in any of this to stimulate local. And the other thing, I wonder if you could maybe say something about the trains, and I think there's another criticism that would be made of a party there, this Dutch company.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, can I take this straight? Let's do that in reverse order then. We actually produced a paper on creating a Scottish currency, which would have stuck £1 billion into the Scottish economy. Now, I explained how you would do it at a national level. The Treasury would probably try to block that, saying that we don't have the power to run a currency. You can do it on a local basis. There's some merit in this. It's certainly in the realm of experimental. So I'm not against. Frankly, what I'd like to see us do is, number one, become bloody independent. Number two, get a proper national Scottish currency put in place, underpinned by a strong central bank, integrated with an investment bank, and incidentally also pension funds. I didn't go into any of that, but so I'm not against. I don't think it's a solution. It has been shown to be best a solution in local areas with the more severe problems. So you can use it. The Brixton pound was an example where it was used in an area, a tight area, for a specific regeneration purpose, and there's been quite a lot of success with that. New Economics Foundation, if you're interested, has done quite a lot of work on that. I'm not against. I would, if I was expending my risk capital, it's not the one I'd pick. I think there's other things. But however, I avoided this in this talk because it's often seen as being the kind of crap the lefties always say. There's a strong case for saying there's a whole bunch of infrastructure in society which you would organise better and it's better for the economy. Trains, comms, housing, these basics. So housing not being a wealth extracting, but even if you just make it places to live, you immediately have economic benefit because people's money's in their pockets, not flying into a bank. They're then spending. So housing, if we got our housing market right, that would be an economic boom just in itself. If we got our transport running on a non-profit basis, once again, it becomes a more effective economic tool because of what it does in terms of not extracting wealth. You also get to, actually punish people properly for not being able to manage the train system. And the same with power. We can definitely say the same with power. We're working on some proposals again just now for the nationalisation of the grid, not of the generating companies, but of the national grid, so you can plan and organise power once again for development purposes rather than for profit-making purposes. And one that I would add is, I'm rural area, broadband. How are we going I didn't touch broadband because it just makes me angry. How are we going to develop disaggregated businesses? Remember what I was talking about, right-sized production? You don't need a city with a factory anymore. You can disaggregate production and design. You could have, in the most remote village in Scotland, a cluster of incredibly high-tech companies producing design prototypes using 3D printers, emailing the data to China, to Spain.
They can split right up.
And spread round.
Benati, Ballingry can have 50 jobs from the tax office.
Yep.
With the communications that they have.
Yep. We put out today, I hope people saw that today we fixed the deficit. Hooray. So Common Weal published a paper today. A large part of that is that GERS was not measuring the economic impact of relocating civil service jobs to Scotland. Now, the tax revenue from that is certainly over £1 billion. Could be over £2 billion, simply because all these civil servants come up here. And I've said it for a while, since we own an airport in Prestwick, I think the obvious place to put the Foreign Office is Cumnock, so that folk can see actual Scotland when they come off the plane and they come over to the Foreign Office. But yes, we can plan and disaggregate to get to different places. Why doesn't this kind of thinking happen? I am sorry to say that Britain is a combination of utterly conventional and utterly craven, and I'm afraid Scotland's no better. I can't tell you who, but I was talking to a senior civil servant in the realm of economic development, a senior public servant in the realm of economic development, and I was complaining a bit about the state of things, and the answer I got was, well, remember that nobody in public realm in the civil service gets rewarded for taking a risk or trying something new. Everybody gets a good bonus if they do precisely what they did the year before and the year before and the year before and the year before. So we have the most pathetically risk-averse public realm who does the same thing it always does. It is beyond me that it is a serious part of the current Scottish Government's economic development that you're going to reorganise some quangos. Merging quangos is what you do when you've run out of every other mundane thing to do. It never works, never does anything. You can design new organisations, but merging quangos to do the same thing is make-busy nonsense. I get very frustrated with this. Scotland is filled with first-rate civil servants. A lot of muppets as well, but that's the same as any industry, as any sector. There's some really bright people, and they're frustrated because they don't get rewarded, they don't get encouraged to try and take these chances, and we do not have, remember what I was saying about the infrastructure? Run me through Scotland's think tanks, and how many of them produce actual papers? We try really hard to produce practical, feasible papers. Now, I'm a fan, I'm a pluralist, so I might be in the left, but I think it's good that we've got right-wing think tanks as well. And I think it's good that we've got Reform Scotland, but they just put out press releases. They don't put out proposals for the economy. And the IPPR, they have discussions in the conferences, that's great. But we aren't exactly flooded with thinking. Scotland has poor thinking infrastructure. Our universities are not geared towards the public realm. They do not, our universities are not geared to thinking about Scotland. They think in Scotland, but not about Scotland. We do not have think tanks. We do not have an adventurous civil service. Our agencies are phenomenally well paid. The average salary in Scotland is 25,000. The average salary in Scottish Enterprise is 37,000. Phenomenally lucrative to do bugger all repeatedly, time and time again.
You there. Could we move on to the...
And to the last question at the back.
No, there's another 2 questions.
Oh, well, look, can I just pick up the Scottish National Investment Bank? I'm going to say I am really disappointed. It took the Scottish Government less than 2 weeks to write back and reject our proposals for Scottish National Investment Bank, and they didn't even take up our offer of a half-an-hour meeting to talk about it. They just sent a letter saying no thanks. I'm not making, right, so we're clear, I think there's, right, I'm careful being Livestream. I think that the Scottish Government is not going in the right direction in the economy. I don't think at the heart they've done the analysis bit. That's my problem. I think if you said to the Scottish Government just now, what's wrong with the Scottish economy, they wouldn't give you an answer. And I firmly believe that if you want to work on something, you've got to understand how it ticks, how it works. Like if you want to fix a clock, you've got to know what the cogs are. I don't think they've done an analysis of the economy. And that means that I think that they tend to want to just repeat again and again. Now, I think this is a shame. And at Scottish National Investment Bank, at the very least, I think they should have put that for proper exploration. Set a committee up and said, let's have a look at this. I think knocking it back in under a fortnight was a mistake. And if the few good ideas which are properly worked up, and I say again, thank you enormously to the New Economics Foundation, who we work very closely with. They've had discussions with Treasury to get us over the legal barriers that are contained in starting a Scottish National Investment Bank. And we did all that work and took it to government, and you just think, God, that took us 6 months. Why did we bother? There is this balance between poor thinking, lack of innovation, and let's be honest, Scotland's a small country and there's too much clientelism. So if you're already a big business, you have a lot more access than we do. I'm working with a number of groups, so I think it'd be okay to name them. People like Scottish Urban Regeneration Forum, the New Economics Foundation, Scotland's Towns, which is focused on regeneration of the towns, Nesta, which is an innovation agency, Community Enterprise Scotland, Social Enterprise Scotland, Oxfam, that does a lot of economic development work, a bunch of individuals, Engender, Friends of the Earth. We all have conversations, and all of us said the same thing. We might get listened to on poverty, we might get listened to on climate change, we can't get listened to on the economy. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of Scotland's big business. And if we knock on the door, we don't get in. And what we've been discussing is whether we could form a coalition, a New Economy Coalition, a New Economy Alliance, what we're going to call it. And we're still in these discussions, so that we could create a critical mass of this thinking, which it would be harder to ignore. Now, the fact that that's as far as our ambitions got there tells you a little bit of the frustration. If it was just harder to ignore us, that'd be a step forwards. The other thing is that I've said this so often. I spent 12 years as a lobbyist, a political lobbyist for the university sector. And one of the things I said was a continuing problem is that whenever Scotland does something, it gets all, inverted commas, the players round the table. And what do you know? The players are the banks and the airports and a couple of the big manufacturers and the CBI. And they seem to see the future as being another version of their present. And I always said this, so who sits around the tables and argues for nanotechnology which doesn't exist? Who sits around the table and argues for renewable energy technologies which aren't happening in this country? So if we keep designing the economy based on the current players, how do we devise an economy which is good for the new players? Now, lobbying is becoming a problem in Scotland. It's been building up and we've had more and more of it, and it isn't helpful and it isn't the best way to do the thinking. And in truth, I rather fear now that where we've got to is that we're going to have to get the independence referendum out the way before Scotland will develop a spine. And once we've got that out the way, I pray that once we get that out the way, that the energy which has gone into both the discipline and the work to get towards independence will move somewhere else. And it will move into innovative thinking about what the new Scotland is like. It's really exciting when you start to do it. I so wish I could talk to you about some of the things we've been discovering in the White Paper Project and what you could do afterwards. But I'm afraid we're in paralysis in Scotland. We're stuck, we're partisan in the Parliament, we are waiting for the next lead on independence, we're not rocking the boat, including me. I thought about putting a slightly pissy press release out saying disappointed investment bank's been knocked back, and then I just thought, that's just going to be another criticism of government, and I better just suck it up and not put that out, because there's going to be fights that we need to fight on other things, and so you don't put that out, and you don't get the thinking. And I do lots and lots of SNP meetings, lots of constituencies invite me to go and talk, and every single time I mention Scottish National Investment Bank, everyone says, brilliant, let's do that. And they all think that it'll be met with open arms, and it's not, and it's a disappointment. So there are many, many reasons that I'm committed to Scottish independence, and freeing us to think like we're not Britain is one of them. We still think like we still think like a region. And I'm sick of thinking like a region.
Subordinate and
Dependent. It's not just that. We've absorbed the dumbass business culture of Britain, which is not a successful economy.
And are judged in that.
We're measured against these things.
As an independent nation.
And there's another, among the many things I didn't talk about is at what point, and I'm the commie here, right, as I'm the lefty, at what point did we stop measuring the economy in terms of productivity, innovation, balance of trade and exports, and instead start measuring it in terms of house prices, footfall in the high streets, and banking profits? Now, this is because if you measure the UK's productivity, it's woeful, innovation rates are embarrassing, balance of trade, well, if we even talk about that out loud, there'll be a run in the pound. So the old fundamental measures of the economy make Britain look like a mess, because Britain is a mess. And so nobody talks about it, except for, incidentally, the best place, the most radical thinking in public in Britain just about now is the Financial Times. Because the Financial Times knows where the bodies are buried. And if you go and read the Financial Times, they're the one paper which is actually saying this balance of trade thing could be a serious problem if anybody notices how much of Britain's money's flowing out and how little's flowing in. And we're not addressing this. I just wish Scotland would stop thinking like a region, and I just wish we'd stop thinking like we're British.
Exactly. Well, I've got a question for you. Do you ever sleep?
No. I'm going to look.
Okay, I promise you. Last question.
Well, two bits. First of all, HMRC produced statistics for every quarter, giving the balance of trade of all the, we'll say, regions of the UK. Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and 9 English regions. Now, Scotland is in surplus, so is Northern Ireland, usually, and so is Wales. The area which has the deficit is England, but that's never mentioned. One thing I was going to say, in France in the 50s, they had an institution called the Commissariat du Plan, and it was to get people to get together. For example, if I decide to export beer to Germany, it would be mentioned, so I couldn't afford an agent to go to Germany, so all small companies would get together and we do it together.
Collectivity.
That's what we should be doing.
Collectivity of scale is how you do things if you're facing collectivity of power in multinationals. And you're right, we do balance of trade figures. This is the problem. If you read the small print, they're utterly indicative. There's no actual guarantee that you can track the flows of money in and out.
It's just a line. They say that oil isn't included in it, so Scotland's doing very well. But I don't know what the actual makeup of the bottom line is.
We actually spent some time in this recently, because when we started to do the project that we just put out today, the Beyond Gers, we sat down to try and work out, are we undervaluing Scotland's exports? I have a strong suspicion that far too much of the economic value of whisky is being recorded in London. So remember that all whisky is traded out of London, and I have a terrible feeling that somehow we are being treated as a wholesale export and that London is capturing the retail export value. So we tried to find out a number of these things. We tried to look at balance of trades, and we read a number of articles and analysis, and it turns out that the balance of trade numbers, they're indicative. They don't tell you anything real. So even trying to work out how much income tax is paid by people who work in Scotland, but whose head office is based in England, we don't know. We don't know the number.
The corporation tax of Tesco is down in Cheshunt.
Yeah.
It's something which is taken from the Scottish economy.
This stuff is about 15 years old. Transfer pricing is a mechanism. Transfer pricing is a mechanism by which tax is avoided and value is allocated by the multinational to different parts of the world. So the invoices which go through which record trade, right, the value of the trade that comes in and the value of the trade that comes out is declared by the producer. That value is a transfer price. It's not the purchase price. It's not the production price. So it's not Scotland that is balance of trade figures are crap. It's UK.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true as well.
And Deanne Julius, who was on the board of governors of the Bank of England, headed a group that tried to figure out what the balance of trade would be in the U.S., and it turns out it's not in deficit in the U.S. It's hugely in surplus.
Yeah, and you know why? The US doesn't allow transfer pricing.
No, it's because the renomination of the flows, so it looks like, if you look at the balance of trade in the statistics in the States, they're as misleading as anywhere else in the world. Because
okay, I was going to talk about the measure. I'm hearing in the corner here that we're going to have to get off. But just to say that this is what I was saying earlier on about America being much more aggressive for this stuff. America measures on the best estimate of economic activity in the country.
Yes.
It doesn't work on the basis of the top line in the accounting sheet, ignoring all the lines of accounts, fiddles all the way up. The US is much more aggressive at trying to capture. It's not perfect, but it's much more aggressive at trying to capture the value. It's on the way down as well, but it's much better at this. Incidentally, we just looking at the tax gap, we reckon that that's one of the things which an independent Scotland could do quite well, is simply preventing the double Irish, that tax transfer price leaking. And if anyone's interested in how it is perfectly legal to tax a corporation in the following way: you tax it on the basis of its international profitability, which it can't hide from its shareholders, proportionate to the in-country trade. So if Amazon is making 2% of its entire company's trade in Scotland, you tax it on 2% of its global turnovers, not its domestic trade, and they cannot transfer that because their shareholders would not permit them to depress the real profitability of the company, and you can't hide it.
That's the California system.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah. Scotland should be. We're working on a paper in this for the tax code. For the white
You
paper.
talked about a double Irish. I think I need a double Scotch. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming and enjoying this incredible man's wonderful exposition. A bit depressing in places, but inspiring. As I say again, I don't know what Robin does for sleep, because he generates more ideas before breakfast than most of us do in a week, or a lifetime.
I collect other people's ideas. Yes. That's all.
Well, so thank you, everybody, and Chris will.
Well done, Bob. Thank you. Is that
Brilliant. I got some good questions there.
Aye, good. No, that was great.